Good. How are you? Yeah.
So much for being here. We're going to get started. Just some brief orientation information. There are 2 accessible restrooms down that hallway. If you don't have a mask, please grab one and keep your mask on. Is there anything else I'm forgetting? Thank you for being here. I'm turning it over to... Is there anyone who doesn't have a seat who needs one? Raise your hand. Are we all okay? Okay. Thank you. That was a great suggestion. I will turn it over to Rabbi Noah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Grace Lee Boggs, movement ancestor, former movement elder of Detroit, would ask, what time is it on the clock of the world? We can ask ourselves that question. We are gathering today hundreds of days into genocide in Palestine, in the midst of burning Los Angeles, beyond a tipping point of the climate crisis, in a time of rising authoritarianism and Nazism around the world, and among many other things, also anticipating the inauguration of a fascist in a little over a week, whatever's happening. I don't know what time it is on the clock of this month, but very soon. We know that Trump too will be full of repression of our movements, criminalization of our bodies and ourselves and our lives. And we know that this is not the first time that our people have faced that kind of repression and criminalization. And I think it is important both for us to honor that what is to come is not the same as what has come before or what we are experiencing now, and also that it has deep roots in the now and in what has come before. And that our people have pushed back for generations, decades, as long as we have existed. So we are here today to hear from some of our local movement elders, to ground us in some of what we faced before and how that connects to now and to what is to come. We are doing that, I think, because what it means to be a part of a lineage and part of a collective is that we are part of a collective story with each other in movement, in queer community, in chosen lineage. And so we get to be in community with these amazing movement elders and with each other, and to hear these reflections and stories and to have that be a part of our collective story. When I was coming of age as a young activist here in Durham, I learned from local Black women organizers that intergenerational movement and honoring our elders is a core part of what it is to be a Southern organizer, because of the legacies of Black liberation organizing here and the intergenerational nature of those movements. And so I think that part of what it is for all of us to be here in this place is to honor that and to be a part of intergenerational movements because of those Black-led lineages of movement. So I wanted to honor that and name that as we sit here together today. And before I pass it to the panel, just to also take a moment to honor and name those who are not with us today, in thinking about our movement elders who we get to sit in this room with and how powerful that is. I'm also just thinking about Howie Mochtinger, Brother Ray Urquhart, Miriam Thompson, Cynthia Brown, Mama Naya Watkins, movement elders who are now ancestors, whose lineage and legacy we also hold. So if there are other movement ancestors of this place who you want to lift up and name, invite folks to say their names into the room.
Minnie Bruce Pratt, Dorothy Allison, Paul Buckner, Ellen Murray, Terrence Williams, and Earl Shelby, and Prince Joe.
We say in Jewish tradition, may their memories be for a blessing, may their memories be for a revolution. We honor them as we also call on them in this work.
Thank you, Noah. Hello, my name is Sandra. I am a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, and I have the honor of moderating our panel. I didn't prepare formal introductions, but maybe I'll just give a little try of introducing each of the four of you. I also want to say that Mandy Carter was supposed to be on our panel, and she is sick, and so staying home for herself and for us. And also she sent along something for us to make sure we announce, like a good organizer. So we'll get to that at the end. But I'll just start by introducing really briefly, I guess, each of our panelists and asking a question. And I'm sort of hoping that you all can give a more thorough introduction of some of your organizing work and what brought you to that work when you answer the questions. So I'll start at the far end. Dr. Borhan Ghanayem is a Palestinian organizer who's lived in Durham for decades and is the co-chair of Voices for Justice in Palestine, along with other work, but has also organized in multiracial coalition, organized with the North Carolina, to push the North Carolina Democratic Party in a more progressive direction, and has been sort of a stalwart in our community's coalition work for Palestine for many, many years. Tema Okun is, I don't actually know how to pronounce your last name. Did I pronounce it correctly? Tema Okun is an anti-racist organizer. She is now also a leader in our Jewish Voice for Peace chapter, the chair of our political education working group. And she is a thought leader, trainer, and educator on the topic of white supremacy culture and organizing white people into the fight against white supremacy. Mab Segrest is a co-founder of SONG and decades-long Southern anti-racist organizer who has been fighting white supremacy, the Klan, and fascism across North Carolina and the South for many, many decades. And Trudy Bennett is a public health educator, a member of JVP's Health Advisory Council, and a abortion access organizer for many decades as well. So that's just what I know about the work that all of you have done, but I'm sure there's much that I don't know. So my first question that I would love all four of you to answer is, what was something that you have been part of that felt like a win? Oh, And you all have, I think there should be a mic down towards the end, or maybe we can share these two mics.
I am impressed with this attendance. I guess people stayed home with all the snow and ice and ready to get out. So thank you for coming, and thank you guys for inviting me. I am sort of like flattered that they counted me with those young people here. But I've been in the Triangle, or in Durham actually, for close to 45 years. And really the first true experience that I had with so many people in this room and out is in 2014, when we decided, and I cannot even recall who decided, how it happened. All of a sudden, I am with a bunch of people trying to get the Durham County to end the contract with G4S. And that was, I mean, we had activities before, but this one was very unique. All of a sudden, I am with a lot of younger people who are preparing posters, T-shirts, meetings, coordination. And I'll tell you, I was swept with this energy, and we worked very hard. I mean, I don't think we have time to go into details what we were doing, but at the end of the day, Durham County voted to end $1 million contract with G4S. That was in November 2014. And I do believe that is a huge win for us. It energized us. It motivated us. We learned how to work with each others. And all of a sudden, this Palestinian is spending more time with his Jewish buddies than with other Palestinians. And that was just crazy great, if that's the right term. So I'm going to stop here and let other people, but we can talk more. I don't want to take more time on this.
Well, it's also wonderful history for getting us ready for this fight we have with Durham County about funding the, what are we calling it? Cop City? Yeah. First of all, so my name's Tema Oken. I'm very excited that I'm now so old. Apparently you have to honor me in some kind of way. So that's the first excitement. I'm going to just refer real quickly to two things, and both of them are sort of long arcs. So, and the first is that I started doing anti-racism work in early 1980s. And at that time, working again, mostly with white people, most of us, I mean, it was news to me then, and most of the people that we were educating, which and most of the people we were educating were based in grassroots organizations doing some kind of organizing, did not know that race was a construct, did not have any understanding of how racism really operated beyond. It's not to say lots of people had lots of experience with, lived experience with racism, but in terms of understanding how it worked and what it was, and in every single workshop that we ever did, we could count on one white woman crying because we told her that she was racist. So, and that doesn't really happen anymore. I mean, you know, so you all have such a, you know, the people that I am privileged to work with now have such a deeper understanding, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, in your bodies about how racism and white supremacy operate. You're so smart about it. You're so strategic about it in ways that just wasn't true in the social justice world I inhabited in the in the 80s and 90s. So that's one. And that's due to so many people doing so much work over so many years, just slogging along, helping us all to understand and to have a strong framework for understanding how oppression operates. And if there's anything I understand, is that without a framework, we're lost. So, I mean, and it doesn't have to always be the same framework, but we need a framework for understanding. So that's one. And the second is that my first trip to Palestine was in 2002. And I'm Jewish, and I went right after the second Intifada. It's before I met Borhan. And I was part of a delegation led by a Palestinian American. And we were the first Westerners to see what had happened after the second Intifada. And what we saw was horrific. And if you had told me then that there would be a national anti-Zionist organization of Jews numbering in the hundreds of thousands, I would have said, you're nuts. That's not possible. And so that's what I will say has been the big joy of my life.
My name is Mab Segrist. I'm really happy today to be here with you all. I'm not happy about what's going on in the world, but I think that we've all felt it coming, you know, and it's kind of here. When a person accepts an invitation to come and speak on the state of the world and the movement, we don't always know exactly what's going to be happening by the time we get to that place, but Los Angeles is burning. I mean, it's terrifying, you know, it's really terrifying, and the other things too. So, but I'm in a room with people I've known for decades, and you've known each other for decades, and we've known ourselves for decades. And I do not hold any of us responsible. We are not the people who are doing this. We are responsible for each other and ourselves, and we will be, because we've got that muscle memory. I recently made a trip to Western North Carolina to talk to some of the folks there, and the whole idea of muscle memory, like what you do that you remember in your somatically in your body, and then you apply in other situations. And so anyway, glad to be here. I got to Durham in 1972 to graduate school from Alabama, born in '49 in an apartheid culture. My father's in the White Citizens Council, started a private school that I went to, segregated, and a whole network of private schools in Alabama. One of his relatives, mine too, shot the first and killed the first SNCC worker who was killed in the movement, Sammy Young. Sammy would be 80 next year. So, and the civil rights movement literally came to my doorstep, gave me a hell of a lot to think about that I really needed to get out of Alabama to think about. I did get a PhD from Duke, but I mainly came out. And it made everything much clearer to me, actually, you know, like that was my education. And I very early started working on trying to understand my childhood, the South, all those things. And I was very lucky to come into a very radical lesbian community here that was supporting women prisoners when they were rioting and doing a bunch of stuff like that. And I worked, and a lot of my work over the art, well, let me just say, it's generational work. When I got to Durham, I was a criminal by the sodomy laws, 10 years in prison. I was a sinner by most of the Christian denominations, and I was sick and a pervert by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And pretty much we've changed all that stuff, except maybe some Christian denominations, which going pretty far back pretty fast, you know. So, but I fought that also too by being in the South. A lot of people of my generation got out of the South, went to New York, went to San Francisco, God bless Los Angeles and California, you know. And I was of a generation who stayed and fought those things out, especially the white women with our families, didn't flee it, and needed to understand not only race and class, which social movements were very good at by that point, but gender and sexuality too, in an intersectional movement that the Combahee River Collective, if you've read it, if you hadn't, you should read it. It's was the 1978 manifestation of Black feminism by my friend Barbara Smith. of interlocking movements that are anti-racist, that are feminist, that are pro-queer, and that are socialist. And you do it all at one time, and you figure out how the movements can come along with you. When I started doing anti-Klan work as an open lesbian and told the Black preachers they should realize that I was like a criminal under the sodomy laws. And they hired me anyway, which was appreciated it. But then at a certain point, one of the older, not SNCC, but SCAF organizers, white woman, told me that she wasn't really in favor of pro-homosexual stuff because she felt like homosexuality was like heroin. It was bourgeois decadence. After the revolution, it would just all go away. So I told Barbara Smith that. She said, it's much cheaper to be gay. So we have literally transformed our lives and the culture. We have done it through AIDS. We have lost so many people. We'll all die. We're going to all die. Don't have to worry about that. It's how we die and what we live for that's important. Figured out how to have children, give it a turkey baster and some sperm. That's not very complicated. There's a lot of stuff we can go back to. There's things called phone booths and landlines, and we really need maps, stuff like that. But and I've also felt fascism coming and fought it my whole life, and it's really here big time. We're not fooling ourselves here, but we'll also get to figure it out. I think though, and I'll stop at this point, like what we will need to do. Well, now we're all first responders, and we will also not be allowed to function within the structures that have both shaped and constrained organizing, which are nonprofits and the Democratic Party. So we don't get to do them anymore. And how we find those ways to create this new world that's coming, even as parts of it are burning, I think is a task before us, and I think we're all serious about it, and I'm glad to be here with you.
Hi, I'm Trudy Bennett. I'll add a couple of things to Sandra's intro. Okay, is that better? Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I grew up in Indiana, in Indianapolis, where I was one of sometimes only very few Jewish children in the schools that I went to. And I was raised to be a Zionist, although I never went to Israel. And I had a very charismatic rabbi in the synagogue that I went to who eventually, this is not very relevant, but eventually sold, when the Jews moved north to a more middle-class neighborhood and wanted their temple to follow them, our synagogue building was sold to Jim Jones, if any of you remember Jonestown. And that rabbi became the wealthiest, the highest paid rabbi in the country in White Plains, and New York. And it was in my childhood world, Reform Judaism was like the ultimate in liberalism, because I didn't know anybody more radical than that. And there were a lot of good values, but there was no questioning of Zionism. And I just never thought very much about it. And then I went to New York to college. And from being the only Jewish person around most of the time as a child, I suddenly felt like everyone was Jewish, which of course is not true. But a lot of the things I thought of as being Jewish were just general, people ate bagels. We had to get bagels from Chicago. That was it. And I gradually became politicized, first through, I went to the Hillel, I tried to get involved in Jewish activities, and at a certain point I realized these beliefs aren't exclusively Jewish, and I don't have to be within the traditional Jewish world to live my values. And I ended up in the anti-war movement. And then I ended up working for SDS in New York. And then I moved to Boston and got very involved in the feminist movement. I went to Cuba on the 2nd Venceremos Brigade in 1970. And a lot of things happened after that. But the most relevant thing is that I spent from 2000, time is very weird. I spent a lot of my time in Vietnam working on war legacies issues, particularly the reproductive and other health effects of Agent Orange exposure. And that really, really changed my life a lot. And, you know, it was not doing solidarity work. It was solidarity with the Vietnamese people and with a certain generation of people older than me who were still living. A lot of them are not living anymore, but people who had really held to the values that had taken them through the horrors of the war, but they were very unhappy with the current communist government. So it was very complicated because I was in solidarity with the country, but really never with the leadership of the country. And there was this whole other world that was very welcoming, and that was just tremendously meaningful to me. Okay, so thinking about wins, I started trying to think way back and, you know, what had felt like a win. And the first two things I thought of were when I was working in the New York regional office of SDS in New York, the main thing I did was support high school girls who were organizing to be allowed to wear pants to school. I mean, this is pretty hard to imagine now, but it was a big fight. So, you know, they won, which was great, but I can't say, it didn't feel like an enormous win. It's like, well, where were they going to go from there? Maybe that was it for a lot of them. And then in the women's movement, the second thing was I worked at MIT for a while as a secretary in the office of these, there was a German woman who was in SDS in Germany, and she got me this job, kind of later regretted it because I spent all my time organizing and not doing the secretarial work. But the office was next door to Noam Chomsky, who was not great in terms of what we were trying to do in terms of secretary organizing. He had a wonderful secretary who was a very talented, accomplished woman who needed a job and needed benefits. And she was a musician, actually, and she did all of his secretarial work and all of his political, the work that came to him because of his political activity. And when our campaign was for staff at MIT, in addition to faculty and students, to get the day after Thanksgiving off as a holiday. So it's a lot like the girls wearing pants to school. You know, I mean, it was a good campaign and really showed the different treatment of different classes of workers. And Chomsky did not support us. But we won in spite of that. And that was the same kind of feeling, like, okay, so what? You know, like, what happens next? And are people just going to be happy that they have the holiday? And in fact, that organizing didn't really go anywhere after that. So then I'm thinking, well, what was actually a win? I could think of a lot of losses, but I think, well, what was a win that actually felt like a win? And what I ended up, what really came to me was the anti-war movement, and when the United States started bombing Cambodia, there was an upswell of anger, and a coalition of groups in Boston organized a massive rally at Harvard Stadium, the football stadium, which seats 30,000 people. I had to look this up, which is huge. It's actually University of Michigan Stadium, I learned yesterday, seats 100,000 people. So, but in an urban area, that's a very big stadium. So we demanded to have representatives from Bread and Roses, the women's organization that I was part of and helped start. We demanded to be able to speak, and as a concession to us, I don't remember if there were any other women speakers. There was a German woman, but not the same German woman from MIT. And 3 of us went up on the podium together and spoke. And actually, I'm going to get emotional. The other 2 people were people I wanted to name when we were talking about people we lost, Fran Ansley and Meredith Tax. So the 3 of us went up there. We had on big hats. We were all, and looked out at 30,000 people. And there were 2 things about that really felt, it felt like a win to have this massive, massive rally. It felt like a win to, even though we had to really demand it, to have women invited to speak. And it felt like a win to show not that we were scared to do this alone, but that we were trying to demonstrate the kind of solidarity that we thought was important in the movement by doing this together. And we took turns speaking, and we supported each other. So that felt like a win. And I will stop there. I've talked too long, and we'll go on to another question.
Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Trudy, and everyone for those answers. I love the like huge range of what wins can look like. I have so many more questions, but Borhan, a few other people, and when they answered that first question, sort of spoke about how they became politically active, and I'm curious if you want to share anything about that, like what made you become politically active?
I thought about this a lot. I was, in 1967, I was born in Palestine. In 1967, I was 15 years old when Israel occupied the West Bank, my hometown. And honestly, at that time, I have very little interest in politics. I was into sports and scouts and all kinds of things. And then the occupation happened, and we had almost a year schools were closed. And that was an eye-opener for me. And then I was in high school, and the first experience, really true experience that changed me was I was in high school, and our high school is in a corner where there is a main road, and the Israeli military always came with cars and started harassing us. And one day they shot one of my classmates to death at age 16 at that time. And the whole school, really, we went crazy. We're not organized, we were spontaneous. And then we started throwing rocks. And the next thing we know it, the school was surrounded by jeeps and trucks. The tanks came to the schoolyard. And then they announced, literally, the school was surrounded, nobody can escape. And then they asked every student to go to his classroom with the teachers. So I went to his classroom after throwing a lot of rocks. And then every classroom was assigned like 5, 6, 7 soldiers with those batons, and they came and they beat the crap out of us. And to make it worse, they beat the teacher. And then after the beating, they came and they said, show us your hands. They wanted to see if there is signs of rocks and we showed it. And then the next thing, another round of beating. By the time they're done with us, literally, my body was blue. So bad. They left the school, and then my parents came and took me, and literally they put me in a bathtub of ice to cool my body. And they didn't want me to go to the hospital because they worried about me get arrested because they do that. Well, honestly, that experience never left me. Never left me. It continued to be at the top of things that motivated me in my life. I went after that, finished high school, went to Cairo, got my college degree in Cairo. I was active in Cairo in 1973, actually. During the 73 war, I was living in Cairo. And then I moved to the United States, and I always wanted to do something. So I went to Texas, spent 6 years in there, got my master's and my doctorate degree. A home where I become an actor to Durham. So I moved in 83. It took me a few years. I mean, actually, just years till I started connecting with people. Well, Jewish Voice for Peace was not as active in the 80s and 90s. So I was with few activists. We used to go into demonstrations and we get like 100 people demonstrating and here and there. But my activism really caught fire when I connected with the Jewish groups and the other progressives in the area. And as I said, our first true test in Durham was G4S. And then the Durham City resolution, which is ending any potential military coordination with Israel. And that was huge. So that's how my activism really started. As a Palestinian, guys, I wanted you to know, every morning I wake up and I get only bad news. Bad news. And sometimes I say, why I wanted to do all of this? I just disappeared, just hide, and because honestly, I cannot count any winning on the Palestinian side. I mean, it's continuous since I was 15 years old when the occupation of the West Bank happened in my hometown. All what I see is decline, decline, decline. But people like you guys are the motivation for me. I tell myself, I said, how could I just not do that? When she wanted me to come here, I mean, honestly, some of my thoughts say, is this going to help? Why am I doing this? But when I remember who you are, guys, I say, oh, I got to go. I have to be with those young people. So thank you. You guys part of my activism. You are part of my motivation. Thank you.
Thank you, Borhan. Okay, I have another question taking us in a different direction. And Mab and Trudy, I'm particularly interested in your answers to this one, but anybody is fine. How have you witnessed movements respond to state repression effectively? And are there any things you'd warn against in times of rising repression?
Well, I think that the thing I want to say next is somewhat in response to that, but it might sound a little different. Because I feel like, I'm happy to go down memory lane, but to me, the question is always like, what the fuck? So what do we do now with that? That's always my main research question, like, what the fuck? And it's not like we haven't seen it coming either, and one of the things I did in my 80s was help to shape an organization to take on the worst Klan and Nazi movement in the country. And it was in North Carolina after the Greensboro murders. Look it up if you don't know it. And we had 3 major groups, and we busted 2 of them and got 17 white men in jail. So I consider that was in the days where you could put people in jail. I figured these white motherfuckers should go to jail, all these black people in jail. When I came back to North Carolina, I wanted also to map what's going on, and I wanted to know county by county by county, because it was after Trump, it was after all that kind of stuff, and there was a moment where I just felt like, if we talk about wins, they're about to take back every single thing. They want to take back every fucking thing we won. And some of that you might not even know we won. So if you want to know what we won, you just know what they're trying to take away, because every one of those was hard fought, And I got very discouraged, actually, first Trump, second Trump. It's like, I don't have to go through this again. And at a certain point, I just said, no, you can't have it. You just can't have it. We're going to hold it, we're going to extend, whatever, So anyway, I wanted to know when I got back and started working with Serena at Blueprint, and they were doing doing excellent work. And we really wanted to know where they are. We want to know where they are by county. We want to map this by county. We want to map it within counties. We want to know where they are and where we are. And I got a little tired of defending democracy after all those MSNBC panels, when it's such a kind of weird conglomeration of things. And for me, it's like there's occupied territories, there's liberated territories, and they can change like that. The fact that California is under such stress from these fires, and it's been a liberated territory. Durham is a liberated territory, and we got to keep it that way. We've got to consolidate where we have a base. We've got to extend it. We've got to help the people who are out there, and we have to have different forms of organizing in the occupied territories than the liberated territories. In 1963, if you were going to organize with SNCC and SCLC in Mississippi, you buried your NAACP card in a box in the backyard. What does that kind of organizing look like? What does it look like when we're not advertising it, printing it on social media, taking 6 pictures a minute of ourselves, having to brag to the foundations who never gave us enough money anyway and didn't give a shit and didn't even, so how do we occupy, and we're going to all be, January 21st, we're all in occupied territory. We really are. And so, but we've got, how do we use our base? How do we extend our base? And how do we be more covert, frankly? And how do we find different forms of organizing? Trudy had a little experience, I think, underground, perhaps. Okay. Okay, anyway, right. Or as criminals, like I was a felon, like I was a felon in North Carolina. They could have gotten 10 years for it. I mean, I've been a felon, I've been a pervert, I've been a sinner, yes. That was my favorite one, actually. I did not sin enough, I must say. But I mean, and we create, we had vibrant communities. We made a way to have families. We took on the most powerful and brutal and just gruesome, just grotesque forces in this country. and they had all that fucking, I mean, and we're still taking them on, and they're gonna, anyway, we'll have to figure that out as we go along, but we have to, but what I was trying to say is we have to protect our own territories. We have to extend it. We have to find different ways of organizing, even as we defend the ones we've got. And we need to just have a good time as much as we can, and grieve when we need to. And I'll just say one thing about the emotional complexity I had to learn as a white person, because I didn't learn a lot about deep feeling in my little white family. But when I went to Nicaragua for Witness for Peace in 1985, and the Witness for Peace folks would take U.S. citizens down to Nicaragua when the Contra were bombing, but they wouldn't do it when there were U.S. citizens there. So we would accompany the Nicaraguans so that they could, and our particular mission was to walk with a family down a road in northern Nicaragua where a father had been killed by Contra, and so that they wouldn't, bomb them. And so they got to go back and say prayers there. But they took us to a little church that night. And the thing I learned there, like it was in the back, there were the young people playing the Mesa Campesina, which was the peasant man. There was like marimbas. I mean, it was just so vibrant. And at the front, there were the mothers of heroes and martyrs sobbing because their children had been killed by the Contra. And I just felt like all of this is happening at the same time. Like there's the deepest joy and the deepest sadness. And I need to learn how to do that too, like to have all of these emotions at one time, because we really got a lot coming down, and to be able to express them. In culture, we have such vibrant cultures. We have like rich academic tradition. I mean, we know this stuff. Like when I was coming along, you had only white male teachers at Duke, and they all congratulated each other. We've created so much stuff, and they weren't doing anything. They just all wrote the same poem. I was so glad when Jackie Sheldon Green got to be poet laureate, because all these guys would just give each other a word and write the same poem. But, we have created such a rich culture, and the cultural stuff they can't take away from us, and we can keep that up and keep each other alive. Anyway.
I've been feeling, the last couple, since the election, like we're in this limbo, it's like the guillotine or something is getting closer and closer, but we're not there yet. And so we can breathe a little bit, but this is a week away. So that fantasy is gone. And I really like what Mab said about if you want to know what the wins have been, look at what they're taking away. And they think of everything. They're like I don't know how many steps ahead of us, because they just think of these weird twists of things that they can utilize.
Setting up in these fucking like corporate funded
think tanks.
Think that
Yeah.
tanks, yes.
Yeah.
And they finally started studying us, and they really know us better.
And you have people, well, I don't have to, you have people like Stephen Miller, another Duke boy, right? Who, has just been waiting to put all this stuff into action, and they are thrilled, that they have the power that they think they have. So in terms of how to deal with repression, I have a couple of things to say. One is we really need to be circumspect about and to really avoid anticipatory self-censorship. There are probably other terms for that. But, it's like the Democrats in Congress, it's like you don't give in before you're defeated. And if we can't really understand that and explain it to other people and support people in resisting that, we're really going to be in trouble. Another thing, and I kind of led up to this in what I said before, is that you can't let anybody tell you that your passion and what's fueling your resistance is just identity politics. You know, like, it's important to keep developing an analysis that shows how every form of discrimination is completely tied in to the whole fascist project. And, you know, like in the women's movement, when we first sort of emerged within SDS as a force, a lot of people, including some of the most powerful women in the organization, said that we were distracting people from the main struggle and that it was a counter-revolutionary thing to do. And, you know, that was just bullshit. You know, they were really threatened. They didn't get it. They didn't want to give up the power that they had. And so I think, you know, we all have to be strong in supporting each other against those kind of attacks. And sometimes it's not as blatant as that, but I think a lot of that still underlies a lot of thinking. And it's wrong. When I was thinking about, well, actually, this isn't necessarily about repression, but we need to really be strategic to the extent that we can. And as opposed to acting out in some way coming from whatever impulse. So an example of this is, we all used to do a lot of shoplifting. And it was fun. You know, sticking steaks inside your coat in some fancy supermarket. I got caught stealing a pair of purple Capezio tights at the Harvard Coop. And as I was going out in the revolving doors, it looked really different then than it does now. But as I was leaving, I got nabbed. And they took me back and you know, I played the pathetic little girl and how sorry I was. And I got off. They didn't turn me over to the Cambridge police. But, you know, this was not a strategic action. And I think, I don't know what the equivalent would be now, maybe that's one of them, but that is what's a waste and a distraction, the kind of acting out for personal satisfaction or of some kind. Yeah, right. And I just want to say, in terms of avoiding repression or combating repression, we need to build structures to be as safe as possible, to be as responsible for each other collectively as possible, but also to be realistic. You know, I was in a meeting the other day where, in a group where people were talking about, well, we don't use, was it Signal? I don't know. Like, we don't use one platform anymore because we don't think it's safe anymore. And so we want to find all these new things that we can use that will get. And someone in the group said, you know, they're going to always be onto us and ahead of us. Nothing is going to be safe. We're not going to find the thing on the internet that is going to make us safe. And we have to know that. and take that into account. And the discussion kind of went on about signal versus this versus that. I don't do any of these things, but it's not for this reason. It's just because I'm in my limit with technology. But I really agreed with him. You know, like it's kind of going down a rabbit hole to keep thinking you can get ahead of them. You can get ahead of them when they have all the tools and the money and the resources to either be ahead of you or beyond to you so fast that you have wasted a lot of time. And, you know, the other thing about repression in the past was, and this also, like, this is really getting back to the 60s. You know, there was a lot of posturing and almost, well, not exclusively among men, but primarily among men. There was, people really believed they were making the revolution and that it was going to happen very quickly. And they acted on that. And some of them died because of that. And it was never real. I mean, to me, getting 30,000 people quickly to come together and fight against the bombing of Cambodia, that was real. We didn't win, but it was real. But any kind of posturing that puts you in a fantasy situation about how important you are, how revolutionary you are, how powerful you are, it's all, you're going to lose. I mean, that is not a winning strategy, and it's a very hard one understanding. I think, you know, at this point, I don't think we're in that same position of feeling like we have so much power, unfortunately. But we've got to build a different kind of power than that.
Okay. Thank you so much. I actually did not. Oh, no. Okay, great. I didn't predict that not shoplifting was going to be one of the pieces of elder advice, but that was helpful. Tema, I have a question for you, which is, what do you wish more people would keep in mind in order to work together effectively?
Well, I think actually what I'm going to say is related to the question about repression too. So I thought a lot about what my role would be on this panel today. And I think what I want to speak to is the personal work that we all have to do in order to be able to show up for ourselves and each other. And so part of that has to do with how are we keeping repression out of our heads and hearts and guts? Like, how are we catching our thinking that is defeating us before we even get started, which has to do with this posturing that Trudy was talking about. And you know, I think about the ancestors that I respect the most, the movement elders that I respect, or young people too. And it's always people who were operating out of such a deep commitment to the movement, to each other, and to an ethos of love. And it's not the people who always thought they were right or insisted they were right or made battles out of who's right and who's wrong, or were driven by ego, or even if they were very impressive people. So I think that what I notice about what works when we're facing repression is our inner strength, which is not something, it's not an individual project. My inner strength comes from being in community with everybody here and with you. And my inner strength comes from having strong enough relationships that people tell me when I'm going astray, which I've been so lucky that people have done that for me. And I think about, so this notion of calling in versus calling out. Another arc that I would say I've seen since I've been in the movement is, by and large, and you know, I'm talking about huge trends, but by and large, I feel like we've gotten kinder. And certainly in Durham, I feel like, and I don't want to be stepping on the toes of anybody if this isn't your experience. So I'm not trying to erase your experience if you've been the target of unkindness or the deliverer of unkindness. So I'm saying just generally, though, we understand in a way that we didn't when I was coming up, that, again, this isn't about necessarily about being right or wrong. And what happens when the repression really comes after us and things feel chaotic, then we clutch onto, we want things to be clear, we want things to be certain, we want to know the right answer. It's a natural, I don't know if it's natural, but it's a common human response. And so we get more rigid when actually what we need to do is to get more fluid with each other, with ourselves and with each other. So like, how much work are we able to do on understanding these are the things that trigger me, and when I'm triggered, maybe I shouldn't be, standing up in a leadership position and making decisions. Maybe I should be asking for help. When I see somebody else who's triggered, how can I support them before I push them away? It's sort of like, how do we, so Cynthia Brown, do people, who in the room knew Cynthia Brown? So she was a marvel, a longtime organizer here in Durham, a close friend. And literally, the last thing she said before she died, way too early, of pancreatic cancer was, well, the first thing she said was beat Trump. And the second thing she said was, do not throw anybody away. We cannot throw anybody away. And sometimes I wonder why people would ever join our movement, because we're so hard on each other. It's like we don't have the right language, we don't say the right pronouns, we don't have the right analysis, we don't, blah, 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 blah. And again, it's not to criticize us, because we want to win. Of course we want to win. And of course, it's much easier to organize on the right when the methodology is let's hate people. That's much easier to organize people into hate. Love is hard. That's my experience. Really hard to love people, hard to love myself. So I just think that we are all now in a practice of love. That's what we're in. We're in a world where too many people are choosing hatred and fear, and it's our job to be choosing love. And again, not easy. And if there was a rule book for it, I would hand it out, charge you a lot of money, but then I'd hand it out. And we could follow it, but that's not how it works. So we have to help each other. We have to have each other's backs. We have to call on our ancestors. We have to do all the things that allow us to stay in an ethos of movement, an ethos of care, an ethos of love, because that is something that that's the thing they don't understand. They don't have a clue. I just think about it. I want you to envision Trump. I want you to envision Musk. I want you to envision Bezos. And I want you to envision Peter Thiel. Not one of those people knows squat about love. Not one thing. And it's partly why they're so hateful, right? They're grasping for something they don't even know anything about. So that would be my advice.
I just have one final question before we maybe open up to a couple questions from the room, which maybe a couple of you could take on, but I don't know who, which is, how can we make our movements more multi-generational and intergenerational?
Naps.
Well, I'm all for it, because it's definitely to my advantage. But and I feel like I have been the beneficiary, as I've gotten older, of people developing more consciousness about this, and I appreciate that tremendously. But it's also, I have a daughter who's wonderful. 2 years ago, she had a medical crisis that led to blindness. So she's blind. So from being a kind of dynamo, very healthy person with some health issues, she became a seriously disabled person. And it's really raised my consciousness tremendously. And also led me to understand how little understanding I had before. And I don't, there's better ways to gain that kind of consciousness. And it should be part of all of our movements, both in terms of aging and disability. I think, like at the beginning, when I just suggested that we ask if there was anyone standing who needed a seat or really wanted a seat. And people were glad that I did that. And people got up and gave their seats. And some people didn't want to sit down, even though other people perceived that they might. That's a pretty small thing, but it should be automatic. And there are a lot of other things that I think go much deeper, that we should be talking more to people about. And it's not just a question of understanding people's lifelong and earlier experiences and what can be learned from them. It's also really delving into what people are experiencing as they age. And it's not just about physical issues. Your consciousness really changes as you age. And there's no way to understand that unless it happens to you or you're talking to other people about it. So for some of you, if you have close families, you understand what your grandparents or older aunts and uncles or parents are going through. But everyone doesn't have that experience. And even if you do, like everything else, aging and disability, the experiences are stratified by race, by class, by the position that people are in a really fucked up society. So I think, and it's also, I really appreciate you having organized this and with the purpose of giving voice to movement elders. But it's also, and I think it's more true than, maybe it's more true than it used to be, that there are groups that are sort of mixed by age, that are not just homogeneous in terms of age. But it's not enough just to have a mixed group with older people in it. You have to understand the mistakes they might make culturally because they grew up in a different culture than you did. And you want them to be able to speak, but also really to be listened to and to be respected as leaders if they emerge as people who are legitimate leaders in a given situation.
I want to speak to the number of wonderful little people who are being raised in this community. There's some very free children who my daughter, my grandson, Julian, he just keeps me on track. He's like, Grandma, why are you doing that? Or Grandma mad, Julian mad, Grandma mad, Julian mad. Why do you ask the same question all the time? It's like, well, you haven't answered, but they're really remarkable. I think they're very remarkable because they've had a different kind of space, and we just need to value them and keep them as safe as we can and let, people ask me how I'm doing. I say, well, I'm kind of toggling between Nazi time and toddler time, and it's kind of a good life balance. But we're going to have to do a lot of that toggling. I just want to speak up generationally for the toddlers and the babies and the ones who are growing up.
So I think what I want to say is I'm remembering a time I was with a group of other women, and we were talking about our mothers, and one of them was talking about saying something about my mother, and her mother I think was my age or maybe a little bit younger even. My mother, she's so old, she'll just never change. And so I let that go for a minute. And then later I came back and I said, listen, it's possible that she may never change, but please, please don't attribute that to her age. Because what you're saying is that, Tema, you'll never change because I'm now 72. And I have changed more in the last 6 years of my life than I've ever changed before. And so please, I guess my plea would be for any of us, so that I wouldn't do that to you and say, oh, you're so young, you'll never understand, or that we would not limit the way we think about someone because of their age.
We heard great answers there, but I wanted to add, activities like this that would include the young and the elders is great for promoting this activism and make it multi-generational. And I wanted to warn you, we are headed into fascism in America, that we all gonna feel it. And it will require us to work hard together at all levels of the society, at all levels of age, all minorities, everybody together. And we will not be encountering one thing. One strategy will not work in the coming days and years. I mean, we will have a strategy different for countering the anti-immigration, maybe a different one for Palestinian hate, maybe anti-Semitism is going to require a different strategy. So we have to be prepared. So we need to educate each others, and don't hesitate for a moment to get somebody and bring a subject with them, because a lot of people lack education. I mean, just yesterday in a coffee shop, my son was engaged with a discussion with an African-American woman who almost never heard about Palestine. I don't know how he got started with her. And then he came to me, he said, Dad, I want you to come. So I went in there and we had this 15-minute conversation. She had no clue about Palestine, zero. And then we ended up exchanging phone numbers, emails. I'm going to add here, I actually, while I was there, we went on Facebook and we got her to like Voices for Justice in Palestine. And I wanted every one of you to like Voices for Justice in Palestine. Right? And then I'm going to add her to our newsletter list. And I honestly, if I was there, I would probably say, why do I need to worry about talking to this woman? I don't know how my son started. I'm going to ask him eventually. But that's what I wanted you to do. Just never hesitate. And let me add something. We are old on most of the issues we are working for, hold the high moral ground. Use that as your weapon and educate.
So I think we have a bit of time for questions from the room. Maybe we'll take a few, maybe let's take 3 questions and then. Yeah. If your question is actually a statement, feel free to just make a statement. So yeah, let's take 3 questions or comments.
This is a longer cord here.
They're all long. Keep going.
Great. Perfect.
Thank you all so much for this panel. I wanted to just ask in a very open-ended way how you deal with fear, personally or in movement work.
And somebody behind you has it.
Hello, hello. Thank you, thank you. I'm wondering if you think that we're at a moment that's so dire, I guess, but that's just one word, where we could potentially create kind of a broad anti-fascist movement that could somehow be the left movement that we've been wanting but haven't really ever had, that could somehow take into account the environmental justice work that we're doing, the LGBTQ work we're doing, the Palestine work we're doing, the and what would that look like? I don't know that enough about the anti-fascist movements in Germany and Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and I do know little bits about that it manifested very differently in different countries, in different contexts, in different, and we're all also connected to different institutions, and the ways that we need to fight back in those contexts might be different, but like, how do we build something that we can all feel part of and that can address, I think probably part of what Tema was saying so much is that a world that we want to live in, where we driven by love, a la Che Guevara.
Thank you all so much. My question is, if many Democrats are already seeding the narratives around the genocide in Palestine, immigration, and trans rights, for example, people like John Fetterman, to the fascists in Congress, is there any use in putting our movement energy into trying to influence the electoral politics for our goals? And what can we expect from state and local level Democrats at this point?
I really appreciate the range of these questions. Could not think of three more different questions, but feel free to take on, maybe choose one or two to speak to and pass the mic around.
Okay, so I'll start with the last one and just say that this is going to be a satisfying answer. So let me say that. And then I'll say that there is so much for us to do. So if you're called to do that, do it. And if you're not called to do that, do what you're called to do. And so, and start to understand, so to get to Elisa's question, that we're part of a large community of people, and I should do what brings me energy and joy because I need to keep doing it, and you should too, and that we start to just build communities of people, so the people who want to do the electoral work, they do the electoral work, God bless them. And, the people, so there's not, we don't have, we can't all choose the same thing, and it's what Borjan was saying, that we have to be so creative in multiple strategies. So I'll say that. And then I'll just say real quickly about the fear. So there are a few things, my joke is that I know 5 things for sure, and they change within 10 minutes. But one of the things I feel like I know, and one of the things I feel like I know for sure at this point in my life is that when I'm feeling something, to feel it. If I try and resist it, it grabs on and it attaches and it gets stronger. And so, and again, this is something that we can do with each other in community. The 3 of us were in a workshop yesterday about grief. And so just being able to, okay, I'm feeling really afraid right now. Do I need to talk to somebody? Do I need to walk with my dog? What do I need to do to be with the fear, let it move through me so that something else can come? So that's one answer.
I do believe we need to be creative in how we're going to face the future. And to your question, we are in Durham are more equipped and more experienced how we going to handle this. We had 25 groups or organizations that were in a coalition together when we fought the city of Durham and worked with them to get that resolution passed. 25 groups. I think that should be an example. And I'm talking locally. I don't know how nationally we can do, but a coalition this large that worked very, very well in 2018. Was it 18 or 19? I forgot. 18. And I think this should be an example. I think we should have started a month ago or two and put this team together. And that is probably the best way to move forward locally, build that coalition. I remember when the resolution passed, and then we were challenged in court and with the hearings. These coalitions worked really, really hard. We were camping over there during the hearings of the Human Rights Co. and so on. So I think we need to be prepared. We need to have a coalition. I think we would be able now to enlarge on that coalition because this is a wider concern now that we have with a fascist government that's going to touch every aspect of our life, from schools to immigration to taxing. I mean, you name it. So we really need to start, and I think we should have the experience to lead us, and I think that's the way. And actually, that is a good way to face fear. If we are together, we will have less fear because we will learn from each other's, and we will. And when you feel like or you start doing things, you'll have less fear. That's my theory. I like to do things, even if sometimes it doesn't pay off, but I think it's a good way to fight fear. Thank
you. I feel fortunate actually to have come of age as a queer person as I did in my 1920s. Sometime I don't know what century I'm in either, but it's like in my 20s and 30s, because like at that point in terms of being queer, homosexual, faggot, dyke, whatever, I prefer dyke myself, but it's my pronoun, I guess. But it's like I felt like I was risking everything. I could lose my mama, my daddy, my brother, my sister, my job, my health, my whatever, you know, but coming out to me was like, I'm willing to risk it because that's who I am. You know, that is who I am, and this is what I need to do. And I had that experience then of choosing that. And also, it's like all they can do is kill you, you know, like, or all you can do is die. We're all going to die, but it's how we live and how we make those choices. I think that's the animating piece. The other thing about fear that I just forgot. Anyway, and then what was the other question? There was fear. There was electoral politics. I'm very glad we don't have Governor Mark Robinson.
Oh, God.
However, you know, like, you know, I mean, we're a lot better off because all of those electoral battles, even though they steal it once they do it, and it's a form of organizing, and different people organize different ways. So, and then what was the other question? So, no, like
movement.
Yeah, like it's going to be shock. I agree. It's going to be shock and awe. I mean, they know how to do that, you know, like, and they're going to have everything coming at us at once. And it's not very far away. And we really need to be sorting that through week by week, I think. I mean, spokes councils, I mean, we're not quite organized for that, I don't think. But we need to have, gatherings like this, and longer pieces and potlucks. I mean, one of the things that the FBI said about the homosexuals in Miami in the 1950s, you can always tell the queers because they're always having parties. So I think we should have more parties. We should structure them. We should have conversations. We should have potlucks. We should get out of the pandemic huddle that I think some of us are still in. Like we just need to like strengthen all of that. Like my friend Lenny back in the anti-Klan, back in one anti-Klan days, all the anti-Klan days, but he just said, like fashion's about atomization, about breaking apart connections. And anytime you're feeling that kind of isolation, call somebody because they will be feeling it too. And like, let's do whatever we'll be able to do then. So I guess those things.
Yeah. I was going to say that about fear, about dealing with fear. You don't have to deal with it alone. And other people are afraid too, but you know who's there for you, and you know who you can call, and you know who you can ask to come over. And you know that you need to build those relationships too, and that they need to be mutual. I have sort of random thoughts about this, but one thing I think is important, that every chance we get to make the connections that exist and that are leading, off the cliff, it's really important to do that. And people are more open at that point to hearing it. So I'm on Facebook, sorry. And I've been seeing a lot of people with this post about Mike Davis's book, Ecology of Fear. Mike Davis was a very brilliant, I don't know what his discipline was, history, economics, labor, everything. He died not that long ago. And he wrote this book about California called Ecology of Fear. And people have been pulling out quotes from it. He described exactly what the conditions were that were going to lead to this kind of tragic inferno. And it's described its inevitability. And, a lot of people on the left had tremendous respect for Mike Davis, but I don't know how many people went out and used that as an organizing tool, because it's shocking to read it now, the precision with which he understood what was going to happen, and it's happening. I think I wish I knew the answer to Elise's questions. Why haven't we been able up until now to build this kind of national movement, to build broader coalitions? And in some ways, it'll be easier to do now. In other ways, it'll be much harder. So I don't know. But I do think that we have to really give a lot of thought and discussion to the importance of coalition and the what it really means. Like you want the broadest possible coalitions, but there is a line where if people have really fundamental differences with a set of values, they can't be part of the same coalition. And people may not want to admit that, and some people may not want to kick anybody out, and it's really tricky. But I think the thing is to have the broadest possible coalition in which there's not going to be some destructive force that's going to destroy it. Bernice Johnson Reagan, another person we should have named as an elder, whom we've lost recently. Yes, I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, sorry. She wrote this wonderful thing about coalition work. Noah, it looks like maybe you have it. I can never find it when I want it. But she talked about it as being agonizing work. being the hardest work, but also the most important. And I remember reading it many years ago and just thinking it was brilliant. It was really important. And then there's also, Loretta Ross has written a lot about calling people in instead of calling people out. And I think that's part of what we need to learn how to do, both in organizing and in building coalitions. And the other thing that has meant a lot to me, I think it might have been Patrisse Cullors, or it was someone in Black Lives Matter. She talked about electoral work and said, what we're fighting for is not the leader we really want. I mean, hopefully there's some opportunities to vote for people we really believe in, whether they are likely to win or not. But what she said was, we can't think of this as fighting for the leaders we want. What we're doing is try to help determine the turf on which we're going to fight. And that has always stuck in my mind. It's really the answer to me when people are scornful about doing electoral work. And it does matter, and it matters the most for the people who have the least and who are the most vulnerable. It's not the end all, but can you imagine if we had Mark Robinson? I mean, it's just unimaginable, and it didn't happen. And that was certainly, there were a lot of things that went into it, but that was certainly a win. I think that's it. Go ahead.
I have one. I think I remembered what I forgot, but there have been points when I was trying to organize something where I felt, we will not consult our way out of this. We will not our theory of change our way out of this. We will not write another grant proposal way out of this. There's moments when I was organizing, I felt like I am in a river in a flood and I'm trying to build a raft out of what the fuck ever comes by. They're going to do that day one, shock and awe, change as many systems as one time as they can, and it's going to feel very tumultuous. So it's partly like how to ride the flood and reconstruct things and kind of figure it out. Everything is an emergent strategy. I don't care if you wrote the book, everything's an emergent strategy. You might want to masturbate between chapters, that's fine, but I wish I had done that with my books. But anyway, it's going to be very impromptu, and it's going to, we're going to be in a week or two, we're going to be in a very different circumstance. And so it's how we figure new things out. But what I saw when I was in Asheville after the hurricane is it's a very steep learning curve, but it's exhilarating. Because people are getting to do shit that they hadn't been able to get to do before, and we're taking care of it. There was this joy in it, as well as grief and disaster, and we don't have the answers, or we would not be in this situation. But we can find different answers, and they will emerge together as we meet circumstances. It's all tragic, some of which will be a lot of different things, but we do have each other, and we need to keep each other.
So I just want to add that I think an advantage isn't the right word. Something we have going for us right now is that the intersections of everything are so obvious, and if people are willing to look at them, and it's white supremacy and capitalism has come home to roost, and the toxic nature of both of them is again obvious for anybody who wants to look, and we can help people to look. I think about Donald Trump too as a logical consequence of white supremacy capitalism in a person, and then our current political situation. So it's and I thought about this the other day, and I've told a few people this, that when I went to get air in my tire, and I'm old enough to remember when air was absolutely free. You go to the gas station, they have an air thing, you put air in your tire. And then I thought, this is how, in my lifetime, capitalism has just becomes that much more fierce. Like everything is monetized. Air for the tire, 2 more inches in your airplane seat. That the logical consequence of capitalism is this. And so it's obvious. So that's one. I think we're in terms of building an anti-fascist movement, let's find a movement of mutual care and love for all beings, then I think we have more that there's a very important narrative project as part of this, which is how we talk to each other about what the world that we want. So that's one. And the second is that I will say this just, it's my personal opinion, but I've been in the movement a long time, and I feel like we are on the national level in some very good hands. I feel like we've got really, really smart, thoughtful, not ego-driven, collaborative leaders, Jewish Voice for Peace, Solidaire, Working Families Party, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Movement for Black Lives, all of so many organizations that are being led by, and I'm not saying there are not problems inside these organizations. I'm just saying that they have my experience as my involvement in these organizations is very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So I just want to give those 2 things as kind of hope.
I want to maybe ask one sort of closing question of all of you. And it's a 2-part question. Actually, it's 2 closing questions, but I think my question that I would love all of you to reflect on is sort of what you would ask us to carry forward, like all of us in this room and each other. And that could be something more like metaphysical, like maybe there's like a spiritual practice or a faith practice or a grounding practice that like you want to offer to us. Or maybe you're like deep in a very particular organizing project right now and you want us all to know about it, like follow Voices for Justice in Palestine sort of thing. So what is your sort of like closing offering that you want everyone in this room to leave with, whether it's a action to take? And I will say, I want to just elevate Mandy Carter, who couldn't be here, wanted to invite everybody to the 60th anniversary of the 1965 Selma to Montgomery, Alabama bridge crossing, March 6th to 9th, 2025. Song and NBJC participated in it. It will be the 50th anniversary, 60th anniversary. The website is selmajubilee.com. So it could be a very specific invitation. It could be an invitation into a spiritual practice or grounding practice. What do you want us to leave with?
I thank you for coming. I needed to leave a little bit, but I'm going to just take a shot at this. The truth of the matter is we are not alone. Half of the country are going to suffer from what is coming. And don't be surprised that some people around you or in your circle who never thought that they will think the way you think, or at least sympathize with your activism, they will. So don't hesitate. I think this is a test. As a Muslim, we have in the teaching of Islam is that these big tragedies, I would call it, and my family encountered a lot of this. And we do believe this is a test. This is a test. This is a national test to all of us. We are not a small minority. We are a good chunk of the people in this country. And we must continue fighting. I do believe we are holding the high moral ground in our fight, in our struggle. So let us continue. Let's build coalition. Let us love each other. And that will help each one of us learn from each other's how we're going to proceed from now on. But thank you. I'm going to head out because I was supposed to be part of a Zoom meeting. Thank you.
We are so lucky, the people that we have in our community. Let me just say that. So I'm going to tell a little story, and it'll be quick, and I apologize to my friends who've heard this already. I grew up, I've referenced my mother's before. I grew up with a mother who was very bold and fearless in many ways, and she was incredibly challenging. Very, very challenging woman. And it wasn't until after she died and I got some distance from her that I was able to understand better why she was the way that she was and why she was in relationship with me the way she was. And I was taking a walk one day, and this was before I really understood the role of ancestors. And so this hadn't really happened to me before. And I heard her speak to me. I'm just walking along, and I hear her voice. She goes, "Tema, I have instructions for you." But I'm interested. I might have been a little bit high. And so I go, "Okay, what are they?" And this was about 5 years ago. And she said, "Okay, the first one is be love and be loved." Now, if you know my mother, to hear her say that, it was like, whoa, okay, be loved and be loved. All right, gotcha. The second one was pay attention. That sounds like a good one. The third one was don't be afraid. Gotcha, Mom. The fourth one was find the others. So I feel like that's what I can offer you. Be loved and be loved. Don't be afraid. Pay attention. We are the others. Find the others. Let's build.
One of the things I saw in Asheville that we don't have here, well, I think we're all first responders. I think we may all be anarchists now too, frankly, but because they have very, very structured anarchist stuff up there, and there's like, I mean, they have like the Matter Tool library that's 2 big warehouses of multiple copies, whatever, like 200. That's it. Yeah, 200 pair of rubber boots that lobstermen in Maine sent down to muck, or shovels and all the tools you would think about, and a forklift. And they figured out how to like get potable water by putting a hose in a stream and running it through this big filtration cube that some multinational for water puts there, and then you put it in a tube and you put it and you get it out to 12 communities to get it back, and we need to accumulate more things like that. I feel like nonprofits have just let us sluice through millions of dollars that we don't have enough effect for. They also have like trailer co-ops, because trailers are the only affordable housing in a gentrified town, which Durham is, so you buy a co-op and you make it a structure. And if you get a membership, then you have the co-op thing, but you can put up to $90,000 in. If you leave, you get that, we need to think more cooperatively and less non-profitly, and have those kind of, we need a tool library, we need one of these buildings, and people just start bringing multiple things to things and get donations. We need that kind of stuff. And I think we're going to be okay. For better and for worse, we were born for this moment. So we need to figure out what it is we're born for in this moment. And I think that we'll do that,
Yeah, actually, the Durham Library, on a very small scale, has a lending library of tools. And, if we're citizens of Durham, we could encourage them to enlarge that, maybe instead of starting from scratch, or we could have something similar on a bigger scale. But I
That's
always,
Trudy saying we're not all anarchists.
yeah. Yeah, I was actually going to say that. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, there's all kinds of creative things that we should be thinking of. So what should people keep in mind? I don't have religious or spiritual rituals to give you, but a lot of you share them with each other. My kind of closing words are that we need to talk to people and learn where they're coming from, but not stop there. I think I've learned that over and over again in different kinds of organizing and also in teaching. That if you give people information, maybe they'll draw their own conclusions, or maybe they won't right away. But if you preach at them about what they should make of the information, you've lost. And it's like you have to stick with it. Like you can listen to people and get information that can inform your priorities, give you information. But that, to me, that's not organizing. It's a tool for organizing. Just one other thing is we really need to believe what these people are saying, our enemies. When Michelle Morrow, who luckily lost to Mo Green, when she said, the devil has taken over our schools, our public schools, she meant it, and when Trump, I still sometimes look at Trump, and I never watched him on TV or anything, but I had this image of him as sort of a buffoon, sort of a rich buffoon. And sometimes it's hard for me to believe what he's become, or always was. I don't know. I don't care. And, when he says he wants to take over or maybe buy Panama, Greenland, Canada, he rambles a lot. He's not a healthy person, but he picks up on what other people say. And some of the stuff may be his own thoughts, who knows? But they mean that, And, something Howie used to say a lot in the last couple of years was, I thought it would be more fun when the empire went down. And it's not fun. It's not fun at all. But it had to happen. And there are good things about it. And I just close with this thing about sharing and tool sheds and stuff like that, tool barns, stuff like that. There used to be in Durham a project, well, actually, there was more than one. There was one in Durham and one in Chapel Hill. And it was an organizing project of healthcare workers, mostly hospital workers, who collected the drugs and hospital equipment, medical equipment, that were being every day thrown in the garbage and burned, that were worth, really millions of dollars. And I'm not a medical clinician, I never have been, but I learned about this, and when I had a doctor friend from Vietnam who came to visit me and stayed with us for a while, and I told him about this, and he said, let's go there. And we went, and, in maybe 10 or 15 minutes, he put all kinds of things in a bag that were going to really multiply the amount of certain kinds of work that he could do in his clinic. And I was like, how are you going to get that through customs? And he was like, well, I have a friend. And he did. He had lots of friends, and he got it back, and he used every bit of it. And those projects don't exist anymore. But if you have a space to store things, it's not that hard to do. There are a lot of people who work in hospitals who hate to see the waste of everything, that's because everything's disposable, right? And that's actually an example of something that we could do that could be revived. There could be some way of getting some of those things to Gaza. There's lots of opportunity. And so I thank you so much for coming. And my last words are just to plug the things that I work on. Anybody here who is a healthcare worker, I mean, I know there are groups that some of you are in that I don't even know about locally, but if you're interested in getting news bulletins and weekly updates on the health-related consequences of the occupation, you can go to jvphealth.org, and there's just a wealth of information and action items. And there's also, we're now, because we've recruited some younger people, we're now on social media. So you can also find a lot of things on Instagram and on other platforms on social media. And the other thing is, any of you who are scientists or like science, go online and look for Science for the People, which is a organization that I belong to that puts out a journal and also does organizing around the scientific collaboration and opportunities for resistance in all the issues we've been talking about, and particularly Palestine, actually. So thanks again. I hope I'll be seeing all of you in other places and at other times.
I think it's so indicative of something that Borhan was like, and I have to leave early because I'm facilitating a Zoom meeting, which is one thing that's, I think, so inspiring to me in thinking about entering this new era where we are going to be working on multiple fronts, is that all four of you who spoke today have been in the work for decades and also are still in it. And to build a life in movement requires, like, I think it just feels really inspirational to sort of be entering this era grounded in the fact that that is possible, and to be in community with people who have been in the work for longer than many of us have been alive. So just so much gratitude for all of you, for all the organizing work you've put in to get us to this moment where our movement could be as strong as it is entering this new era of fascism, and also for your time this afternoon sharing so much wisdom with us. Maybe we can have one final round of applause for. And thank you to Itai for doing our AV. And Eli Longnecker from the JDP Political Education Committee was the sort of visionary and organizer of much of this event, and they're just getting over a sickness, so they're not here, but I also wanted to give them a shout out. And we technically we have like the space, our time in the space is over, but we have to be fully out in an hour. So we have a little bit of time to mingle. If you want to I would suggest maybe say hi to the person next to you. If you don't already know them, make a connection, ask them whether they're in an organization, and on your way out, help tidy by stacking up a chair. Thank you all.